Staying out late to get married, huh? I typed that and sent it over. David, of course, didn't reply. He was actually getting engaged, but forgot to inform me, his girlfriend. The day David got engaged just so happened to be my birthday. I watched, expressionless, as the woman in a red dress wrapped her arms around his neck on television, announcing, "Welcome everyone, to my and David's engagement party." David kept his hands on her waist but continued to reject my calls. "Miss Lily, are you aware of the rumors online about David dining with an unknown woman?" A reporter, hesitant to challenge David, threw this curveball at her. The media swarmed Lily, eager for her response. But David just furrowed his brows, quieting the room. He took Lily's hand casually. "It's just a meal with a subordinate, those photos mean nothing." "Really? A subordinate for both food and bed?" My phone screen flickered, and I scoffed at David's message. He said, "Happy birthday, babe. I'll be home soon." I grew up in a single-parent home, relying on my father since I could remember. Fortunately, I made it to Cambridge's famous design program. Maybe it was the artist blood from my late mother, but I had quite a knack for design. I worked hard and bagged multiple awards. Just seconds after toasting with my dad over winning a study abroad scholarship, he trembled and coughed up blood. It was a freezing winter night. The doctor said it was lung cancer, late stage. I walked out of the room in a daze, while my father followed me apologetically like a child who'd done wrong. "Is it expensive?" "You need to study abroad, let's not treat it." I pulled myself together. "Dad, I've won many awards, earned a lot of money." After many pleading conversations, Dad was admitted for observation. But I barely attended classes, constantly working odd jobs to make ends meet. It was no secret in the department how desperate I was for money. Delivering food to a KTV, I sighed. "What do you want?" "You're pretty, learn to use it to your advantage." These rich kids had every intention of stripping me there on the spot. I knew I was attractive and always had suitors, even offers for huge allowances when I got into the design college. My dad nearly attacked someone with a shovel when he found out. Now, he lay in surgery, hanging by a thread. Then David appeared, asking, "Who do you think you are?" scaring the lady. He handed me a card, his voice like mist. "Heard you won awards, shame to waste it. Use this." In that moment, David was like a savior to me. Grateful, I convinced myself he wasn't like those proposing to keep me. After all, he paid the exorbitant medical bills and stood up for me. I studied design, even won silver at a global art competition for students. I wanted to repay David, offering my skills in return. After his brief glance, he handed me a business card for company and suggested I interview. For 3 years after, carrying unspoken feelings, I followed David, unknown and unrecognized. Looking back, David, a wealthy heir, wasn't much different from those who wanted to keep me, a better actor. The door opened, drawing me from my thoughts, and I saw David, weary but smiling. No explanations, he rested his chin on my shoulder, his voice gentle as usual. "Why aren't you asleep? Waiting for me? Why didn't you tell me about the engagement?" I asked calmly, though the unfamiliar perfume sent from him made me sick. David looked tired but held my hand firmly. He just frowned slightly and said, "Just an act. Things will be like before." My mind screamed, like I'd been slapped hard. I pulled away abruptly, asking, "Like before? I was your mistress for 2 years?" David's expression changed, studying my words, then he spoke again, effortlessly. "You want to be my wife?" "Impossible." Seeing me pale, he softened his tone. "I don't like Lily. It's just a business deal, I won't mistreat you." His words choked me, only now did I see his cruelty and arrogance. "Let's break up. I'll resign from them." 3 years of affection seemed laughable. David grabbed my hand, pressing me against the wall, heedless of my struggle, kissing me. "Anna, you love me, you can't live without me." His tone was confident, sure, as if I couldn't survive without him. He knew I loved him, knew what his aid meant to me, redemption during dark days after my dad died. I won't be your mistress. We have no future. My heart was dead. I told him flatly. You'll regret this, David said, angry and offended, before leaving. The only sound left was the wind howling outside the door. That night, I packed up and moved into a hotel. Sealing the door, a dull ache gripped my heart. I imagined countless outcomes for David and me, never thinking it'd end so messily. How ridiculous it was, I'd been David's mistress for 2 years. He was holding up my resignation, and I wasn't rushing for it. Bigger things to tackle now. Missing the chance to study abroad 3 years ago. That was a thorn in my side. I learned so much about business games there, but now even holding a pen felt hard. So, I signed up for classes at a famous art studio. While filling out the application, David sent me a question mark. Crazy, I muttered, blocking him immediately. The guy collecting forms chuckled deeply. Feisty, aren't we? He teased, resting his chin on his arm, eyes smiling brightly. I blushed a bit and handed over the form, looking down. Anna? He glanced at me, his tone strangely complex. I'm Edward, the teaching assistant here. He smiled lightly. His voice wasn't like before and he quickly dropped the handshake. I looked at him suspiciously. He didn't avoid my gaze and let me stare freely. I didn't bother thinking much, checked the time, and left. Still had trouble to deal with. When I arrived with my bag, Lily had been waiting for a while. She was wearing a custom black dress studded with diamonds. It was more classy and elegant compared to the fiery red dress she wore at her engagement to David. She looked like someone declaring her territory. I knew David called off our relationship when he got engaged. I never came between you two. To avoid trouble, I spoke first. Lily looked surprised, glanced over me, and slightly parted her red lips. Miss Anna, you misunderstood my intentions today. I just wanted to say, you can be with David. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, looking at this woman leisurely playing with her nails in front of me. Her tone was calm, but the disdain and superiority were hard to miss. He cares about you, but being his wife isn't something you can do. You can continue being with him, just don't cause any trouble for me. I burst out laughing and raised my hand to interrupt her. Did Miss Lily forget to bring her brain when she left the house today? From this angle, you and David really suit each other, two fools. She seemed in disbelief that someone not of her status dared to not only refuse her offer but insult her. Furious, she swept a teacup off the table, crashing it to the ground. Can this pointless conversation end now, Miss Lily? I said, backing away without looking back. I should have checked a calendar today, it's a bad day. Outside under the streetlight, I saw a familiar figure and sighed. What are you doing here? David had dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept. Are you serious? Stop messing around, okay? Lily has already talked to you, right? You can come back. Seeing his tired demeanor stirred some old feelings. But his presumptive tone woke me up. It reeked of an upper-class arrogance and condescension. To him, I was just a self-recommending lover or a kept pet. People in the circle would always look at me with mockery or malice whenever I appeared with David. I knew I wasn't a match for David. Besides, I was in debt, a relationship easy to criticize. I got used to the thinly veiled scorn in the office gossip and the judgmental looks at parties with David. Despite being talented, acknowledged by my mentor, and a rising star wronged in a competition, I struggled. I was desperate to break into that circle and earn a place by David's side. So I worked hard, helped him close deals, and cleared my debts as quickly as possible. After another project I led was approved at a board meeting, at the celebration, someone joked with David, "Your girlfriend's something special," and gave me a thumbs up. Holding back my overwhelming affection, I smiled graciously and expressed my thanks. What did David do then? He looked at me through a drunk haze, didn't deny the compliment, just nodded with a smile. Anna has always been excellent. Suddenly, he kissed me without warning, like a storm. My mind went blank, like a paused tape. Even though the night was windy and the moon was dim, it planted a memory that lasted long. So when Lily offered me a place in her superior tone, I realized, my genuine feelings were just a topic of amusement to them. Just for fun, don't take it seriously. David must have thought I was the same Anna who would run back to him with some coaxing. He said, "Anna, I've given you a chance. Stop making trouble, or else I..." He looked at me with slight annoyance and condescending detachment. I smiled at him, and when his eyes lit up, I slapped him hard. "Get lost, David. You're just an arrogant fool." The slap enraged David. At first, he looked at me in disbelief, then angrily snarled, "You dare hit me?" He moved forward to confront me. Right then, a guy suddenly stepped in and shielded me. "Can't you take a hint? A breakup is a breakup, don't you get it? Your face must be thick, Anna's hand is sore from hitting you." Edward mocked while giving me a reassuring smile. His hand was warm on mine. David stood silent for a few seconds, then spoke with irony in his voice. "No wonder you're calling it off. Already found a replacement?" He caught my eyes. Maybe my gaze was too sorrowful, because his mocking demeanor faded. For the first time, I truly snapped out of this illusion he spun, feeling only disappointment. How foolish I'd been to waste my youth over someone like him. I turned down my mentor's invitation, quit my passion for art, all to match up to David. Why did I end up like this? I thought, gripping his wrist tightly. "David, you don't deserve me." Leaning my head back against the seat, I watched the cypress trees rush by outside, deep in thought. "Anna, you have the worst taste," Edward suddenly broke the silence. "Giving up art for that guy?" I was going to take a cab alone, but he insisted on coming, worried I'd do something foolish. He squeezed into the taxi with me to make sure I got home safe. Edward was chatty on the ride, helping wash away some of the bitterness from meeting David. "How'd you know?" His tone while talking about David carried a note of frustrated disappointment, making me ask, "What's your relationship with Mark?" I looked at him directly and saw his eyes flicker with avoidance. Mark was the professor who'd encouraged me to study abroad and had reached out to me when I chose to work at David's company. He said as long as I kept my passion for art alive, he'd always have my back. I should have guessed. The art studio application I got so easily, and Edward's timely appearance, were all Mark trying to help. Understanding all this made me feel shameful. I felt lost for words, seeing Edward's accusing gaze in the rear-view mirror. "Hey, don't overthink it," he said. "Mark always said you were the most talented student he'd ever met." I wanted to see it for myself. When I first heard about you, I joked that Mark had poor judgment, picking a love-struck fool. "Remember, Anna, love is a deep sea, turn back while you can." His deliberate drawl made me relax a bit, and I couldn't help but let out a laugh. Maybe it was the shared topic, but it felt like the distance between Edward and me shrank, and we chatted non-stop along the way. I intentionally avoided talking about the ridiculous 3 years with David, sticking to discussing insights on painting and design. Edward listened quietly, then paused for a moment before giving me a sudden smile. "Congrats, Anna. You've finally shaken off the shackles of love and found more freedom. Being yourself is the most important thing." His voice was mellow and clear, and his eyes were filled with amusement. Under his accepting gaze, my eyes started to get watery. "You're pretty good at comforting people," I said. Edward just laughed softly, suddenly reminding me of the carefree boy he once was. "Thanks," I whispered sincerely. He raised an eyebrow, chuckling lightly. After that day, I decided to pick up my paintbrush and start learning again. Luckily, I still had the basics down, and with Edward teaching me, I quickly regained my skills. Still, it wasn't easy to reach the level I once had. Every day, I commuted between home and the studio, spending all day there. Even Edward, who encouraged me to keep painting, often joked, saying, "Anna, don't put pressure on me. You're making it tough for me." Part of my job as a teaching assistant is to look after the students' health, too. I accepted the small cake he handed me, feeling a warm touch in my heart. But before I could swallow it, I noticed Edward's smile turn awkward as he glanced nervously at someone behind me. I turned to look. "Mark, what are you doing here?" I asked cautiously, my eyes darting around, feeling guilty as I dropped my gaze. Mark's eyes were practically sparking with anger. He reached out and gave me a heavy thump on the forehead, his voice stern. "You really want me to come here myself to find you? Grown wings, and now you don't recognize your teacher?" Hearing my teacher pretend to be angry, I felt my nose tingle, and suddenly, tears started falling uncontrollably. "Come on, man, I'm having a meal here. Can't we talk after?" Edward cheekily chimed in. "Feeling soft-hearted, are you?" Mark lifted his eyelids to give Edward a sideways glance, then sighed and ruffled my hair with his large hand. "Good girl, there's a long road ahead. Stop looking back." After repeatedly promising Mark I would turn over a new leaf, work hard on painting, and vowing to win the design competition in half a year, Mark finally left satisfied. For a moment, only Edward and I exchanged glances in the now quiet studio. The light from the lamp cast a gentle shadow over his eyes, making his gaze especially soft, and even my heart felt tender. His pointed stare reminded me of Mark's teasing words, which made me feel a bit uneasy all of a sudden. "After listening to Dad's rambling, I'm starving. Would you do me the honor of coming to grab a bite with me, Anna?" Edward finally broke the silence with a smile. Maybe because I'd been in one position for too long, my body felt stiff, and when I stood up, I nearly lost my balance. Luckily, Edward quickly caught me. As I steadied myself with his help, a sudden noise sounded behind us. David stood at the door, looking upset, glaring at our intertwined hands, his voice filled with anger. "What are you two doing?" His forehead vein throbbed as his usually indifferent tone turned sharply annoyed. "You two dating now? None of your damn business. What right do you have to question me?" I said coldly. "Since when were you so desperate? Can't live without a man?" David's lips curled with sarcasm, harsh words spilling out. Before I could react, he stepped closer, pinching the drawing I had just finished, a smug look on his face. "Think he can give you something? You're still stuck painting with your own sweat." As if recalling his rich background, he tossed the drawing aside and continued, "Anna, I'll give you another chance. Admit your mistake and I'll forgive you, let you return to my side." I watched as that week-long effort imprinted with his footprints, gritted my teeth. Just as I was about to slap him, a playful voice stopped me. "Wait. Don't dirty your hands, let me," Edward said, sounding relaxed. Those spiky boots I wore today finally came in handy. Things escalated unexpectedly. By the time I realized what was happening, David was scowling at Edward, struggling to stand on one foot, which was honestly quite funny. Seeing Edward ready to kick again, I quickly stuffed a piece of cake in his mouth to calm him down. "We're already broken up," I stated flatly, watching David's shocked face. "I didn't agree, so it doesn't count." His face turned grim, tightly gripping my hand as he nearly shouted. "What is it? You rich kids develop a fondness for mistresses?" Indifference in my voice, I withdrew my hand, ignoring Edward's concerned gaze. David seemed to choke on his words, anger and embarrassment flashing through his eyes, as if admitting he liked me was humiliating. "You'll regret this, Anna. I was your best choice." Standing straight abruptly, he left one last threat before limping away. Watching him leave, I glanced at Edward, who smugly shook his spiky boots. Speechless, I rubbed my forehead, ready to scold him for being impulsive, when Edward raised an eyebrow, seeming to anticipate my scolding. He smiled, his eyes shining like fragments of gold. "Feeling better now?" His smile stirred something in me, but remembering David's parting words, worry lingered. With his personality, I feared this wouldn't end smoothly. I kept an eye on Edward's condition over the next few days and, seeing nothing unusual, relaxed a bit. The design competition was approaching, so I focused entirely on preparing my pieces. But I underestimated David's deceitfulness. One day, I arrived at the studio as usual, glanced at classmates, and was met with uneasy stares mixed with whispers. Isn't she the one being kept? Explains why someone her age is learning to paint. Her guy's getting engaged and doesn't want to hang out with her anymore. After things didn't work out with David, she's latching onto Edward. Such a mess. I froze, feeling humiliated. Checking my phone, the once quiet forum was now buzzing with activity, posts stacked in layers. An anonymous person had posted photos of me leaving David's with my suitcase after their engagement, along with videos of me meeting and talking with Lily. The video has no sound, but the odd angle captures Lily's angry face as she knocks over a teacup, while I strut away arrogantly. The caption reads, "Has the other woman become so brazen? Daring to confront the wife?" It piqued everyone's curiosity, and they couldn't resist clicking in. Regardless of the truth, everyone became instant justice warriors. I know this woman, she was so pretentious in college, stringing along several guys. Isn't she the one who won loads of awards and got sent overseas to study? Is her private life really that messy? That's why she's got some tricks up her sleeve, making so many men chase after her. Anger and panic filled my mind like concrete when I saw Edward striding over. "Anna, don't be afraid. We know the truth. I'm here with you." He hugged me tightly, as if I were fragile glass that would shatter if he let go. His trusting gaze made my facade of calmness crumble, my voice carrying a hint of desperation. I said, "Edward, what they said is true. I've been David's mistress for 2 whole years. Why did he do this to me? He knows. He knows I lost my dad 3 years ago, knows I have no one to support me, and knows how deeply he can hurt me. When my dad was sick, I took care of him every day. I forced myself to be cheerful, made delicious food, and constantly talked about our future, but it couldn't stop his condition from worsening. When he knew his life was ending, he held my hand tightly. Anna, I'm sorry. Promise me you'll be okay on your own? Don't do anything foolish." His eyes were cloudy, and he only relaxed when I nodded through tears. Back then, busy with sadness, I didn't notice David's worried and pleading eyes behind my father's. David was like warm sunshine, pulling me from the darkness. But now, he's planning to drag me into a deeper hell. This issue isn't too hard to solve, but the person who was once my savior, David, has become the mastermind of this public opinion. The overwhelming insults online left me lost for a while. With Edward's encouragement, I released the complete recording of the dinner with Lily. Funny enough, David taught me the habit of recording. Once, when I accompanied him on a business deal, someone double-crossed us, claiming we bribed them. David calmly pulled out a recorder, flipping the situation instantly. Just like now. As expected, those who hurled insults yesterday, even finding my address to throw eggs and paint with curses, changed their tune after the recording was out. Is this how rich people act? So disgusting. Poor Anna, slandered with no voice, insulted for so long. Of course, some remain stubborn. Why pity her? Living with a rich guy means no worries about food or drink. And all those chasing her, who knows what she's really like? Edward got so mad reading these comments, he registered 10 accounts overnight to argue with them. The next morning, he came over with breakfast, looking exhausted. I couldn't help but laugh and feel touched, grabbing a towel to help him cool down as I spoke. I won't take it to heart. Online people are all about gossip. They're always emotional, always ready to fight, never remembering. They think they're justice incarnate, but they're just clowns, tools for the real demons. If I hadn't faced my father's death so early, hadn't had Edward by my side. If I were just a fragile girl attacked by endless online abuse, even former classmates, paid to declare, "It's all true, she's just a tramp." No wonder she couldn't study, parentless and all. I might have considered ending it all. That's the cruelty, thinking they're harmless whispers, but when they trigger an avalanche, they backtrack, proclaiming innocence. She should have explained clearer, everyone said so. how's it my fault? I'm a victim too, I got misled. Evil needs punishment. Edward and I have gathered all evidence. Besides the recordings, we collected names of those who openly insulted me. We handed everything to the police, sent legal notices, filed lawsuits. Leaving the station, it rained heavily. As Edward drove me home, he waved casually, saying, "Good night, remember me," before darting off. The rain had left puddles shimmering in moonlight. A breeze brought a dragonfly, its delicacy rippling through my thoughts. I smiled dumbly, tightened my scarf, and unlocked my door. As the key turned, the door eased open, and two large hands yanked me in, slamming against it. "Why didn't you come to me?" David's voice was rushed, confused. "You just need to be with me, and I can solve it all. I think I'm in love with you, Anna, come back." He smelled of rain, his face thinner than before. "Don't call me that, it sickens me." "Stop pretending, David. You're the one who leaked all this, aren't you?" It's funny, the one who held my youth, knew my weaknesses, claimed to love me while striking cruelly. David was silent, resting his head on my shoulder despite my struggle. "Anna, I think I have a fever. I shouldn't have let the media talk. I tried to stop them from attacking your dad but didn't expect this. I thought you'd come to me to fix it." His fevered forehead pressed against mine, begging for forgiveness, to return to his side. I laughed coldly. "You're disgusting, David. Get out now." I pointed my phone at his pale face, adding, "What if I sent Lily the video of you harassing me? So they are getting in on the bidding, right?" David's eyes were already red, and he looked like he'd lost his patience seeing me so unyielding. He got aggressive and tried to force a kiss on me. The difference in strength between men and women is just too much. No matter how hard I struggled, it was no use. David was getting closer and closer, when suddenly the door behind us got kicked open with a loud bang. Then I heard Edward's anxious voice, "Anna, you home?" I suddenly remembered the keys I dropped outside the door. David clearly realized it too, and his face turned dark. When Edward came in, he didn't say a word, just went straight at David and punched him. I finally felt relieved, my body almost slumping in exhaustion. "Anna." Edward pulled me into his arms, his familiar scent washing over me. I slowly opened my eyes to see his gaze filled with concern. My nose tingled, and I couldn't help but choke up. David caught a cold in the rain and was down. When the cops arrived, he was still mumbling in a daze at my place, "Anna, I love you, forgive me." It wasn't love. He just wasn't satisfied that I left him and didn't fall apart. Instead, I woke up and got stronger. This wasn't love, it was his loss in the business game as a businessman, not getting what he wanted. He bet I wouldn't give up on loving him. I bet on loving myself more, nothing else to it. When Mark heard what happened, he had Edward bring me over to his place that day. "How do you think of coming back to find me?" I asked as I slowly sipped the rice porridge with century egg Edward had made. Edward tilted his head, moodily looking at me finish most of the bowl. Then he reached up, fixing my messy hair. After that, he lazily met my gaze and said, "I can read minds." Suddenly heard someone wishing for justice to come through and take care of that bastard quick. At first, I didn't pay him any mind with his joking attitude, but then I caught the teasing tone and felt my cheeks heat up. In that long look, bits of sunlight lit up his eyes, and the straightforward, intense feelings were clear. Wait a minute, I suddenly remembered. The design competition's about to start. If I don't win, Mark will probably kick me out, right? I blurted out, trying to break the weird vibe between us. As soon as I said it, Edward chuckled, reached out to pat my head, and said in his teasing voice, "Well, I've been the one distracting you from studying, so shouldn't I be punished? But hey, Anna, even if you don't win, you can still stay here. Edward is so good to me, I'm almost falling for him." That said, this design competition's a big one, initiated by Cambridge University, meant to uncover more talented artists. The winner gets a chance to study in the UK for a year. It's something every designer is dying for. My reason is simple. 3 years ago, I gave up an opportunity for an overseas study program, and the destination was the UK. I already passed the preliminaries, and the finals were up next. I was determined to win this time. Mark was a judge for the competition, so he moved out early to avoid any scandals. Even though Edward and I were living together, we hardly saw each other. He understood what winning meant to me, and apart from reminding me to eat, he never disturbed me, like that unintentional flirting that day was just a dream. Soon enough, the day of the competition finals arrived. The event invited not only industry-renowned professors but also upper-crust sponsors. Naturally, David was on that list. David was wearing a tailored suit. Looking closely, it was the one I personally picked out for him, even had my initials embroidered on it. He'd left it untouched in his closet, but now he was actually wearing it. I took a deep breath. It wasn't about David watching me, but more the once shelved dream now so close, and I feared it was all some unbelievable fantasy. Mark stood center stage beside the trophy representing the championship, scanning the faces of all the contestants, finally landing on mine. With an all-embracing smile, he loudly announced, "Congratulations, Anna." I practically stumbled onto the podium. I was so out of it I didn't know what to say. For a moment, all I wanted to do was cry. After a while, I finally managed to speak through the lump in my throat. I was too young then to realize the price secretly marked on every gift the world offers. But luckily, someone once told me I could shake free from the shackles of love and chase freedom. Edward was in the audience, looking at me with warm, understanding eyes, and if you looked closely, there were tears glistening there. Since then, I picked up my brushes again and discovered that dignity I once lost, untainted, unjudged, and untrodden, was back. Finally, I got what I wanted. The applause was loud enough to shake the room. As I left the stage, I ran into David. He looked complicated, moved his lips but said nothing. As I passed him, I think I heard a sorry like a whisper on the wind. I didn't look back, just kept walking forward step by step. Everything around me seemed to slow down, like an old film with faded colors. Standing by a huge window, I jokingly answered another video call. "You're so annoying, Edward. It's not like I'm not coming back. England's full of bad guys. Anna, don't let them fool you." There he was on screen, looking pitiful. "I'll practice till I have 8-pack abs for when you get back." After I promised more calls and eating on time and noted down a bunch of reminders, Edward reluctantly hung up. People would joke about whether I'd stay for Edward after winning, but before I could answer, Edward jumped in first. A man should live freely in this world, not cooped up in a room. Besides, even if my wife leaves this planet, she'll still be my wife, humph. I drank a ton that night. Edward knew I was happy, so he didn't stop me. He just sighed and squatted down quietly when I demanded, drunk and sloppy, to be carried home. Barely home, swaggering from being tipsy, I looked at him hydrating himself after dropping me from his back and teased, "Edward, tired already? Guess 6-pack abs just aren't enough." After a couple of silent seconds, he leaned forward, grabbing my mischievous hand, and with barely a foot between us, smiled, "Anna, I just tire easily. Doesn't mean I can't handle it." I had a bad feeling, but before I could react, Edward cupped my chin and kissed me. It was a light, probing kiss, but when I tilted my head to reciprocate, it seemed like a floodgate opened. His kisses started falling like gentle raindrops, turning into a passionate embrace between lips and teeth. Gasping for air, just as I was about to speak, I was pulled into a fierce hug, words swallowed in the heat of the kiss. In the daze, his low voice whispered in my ear, "I love you. And your free spirit." As the plane's engines roared, the memories cut off sharply, a bit of warmth spread over my face as I looked out the window. The plane flew, amidst endless clouds, as earth and spirit found their freedom.